There might not be a better person to get a read on the entertainment and sports media climate than my guest today, Tag Garson. He is president of Excelsior Sports and Entertainment, a consulting and marketing company. He has worked for Wasserman. He has worked for IMG, ESPN. The list goes on. And now we get to get a read on him. Should be really interesting. This is the Honest Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a TV and radio presenter. And Tag, it's an absolute honor to have you on. Looking forward to, I assume that this is a new experience for you, but you've heard about this podcast. But what we're going to do, in essence, is like look at your life through a kaleidoscope. So we're going to see all the different angles. We're going to see all the different lights and where they are and where they come from. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate you asking for me to do this, and can't believe it's only been a few days since we met each other in a Starbucks in LA. So, very quick turnaround to be able to make this time. So I appreciate it.
Well, the guy that we were with at that Starbucks in Los Angeles, he revealed something pretty funny about you, and that
Uh-oh.
while you were in Los Angeles, he said that you were a very accomplished and talented backseat driver. He said that within the 3 days, you were backseat driving, if we can use that as a verb, for about 500 miles. What makes you so good at that?
Well, I'm not so sure that he's accurate with that first, Brian. I think that it has a lot more to do with me trying to make sure we didn't crash. So that to me is a little bit more important, particularly in Los Angeles, but no, not at all. I actually don't like when there are backseat drivers. So I was really trying to make sure that he was going in the right direction as opposed to going someplace that, and as you know, in Los Angeles, you can make a wrong turn and end up someplace you really don't want to be, and then it takes you forever to get back. So I was trying to avoid that situation more than anything else.
Why does it seem like your pattern of career and where it's gone, that it's been one right turn after one right turn?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I'm not sure that I would say that. I think really what it has been is just like life, where you're going to go down multiple roads and hopefully you end up in a good place. And I've been very fortunate when I look back at my 32 years in this industry, where I've worked for some incredible people, really good organizations, had some luck along the way, and have had some tremendous experiences where throughout that time I've met some really, really great people. So I just feel very, very fortunate that where I've been over this time has allowed for all of those situations to take place in my life as opposed to really making all the right decisions, because that's not the case. And as you know, with the expression, man has a plan and God laughs, and I really believe that that's true. So I think it's a lot more to do with just being fortunate.
I know that one of your early ambitions was doing play by play.
Correct.
And if God was able to do play by play on your career and where it went from your aspirations of doing play by play in a sports broadcast perspective, but then looking at the different moves you made, what would you want that telecast to sound like?
To sound like, I would hope that what I would have done during any of those broadcasts would have been to bring enjoyment as well as interesting nuggets. I always wanted as a producer to leave the audience feeling something, an emotion, to have learned something that they didn't know before. Otherwise, I felt like I had failed. So for me, I think that any broadcast that I even did in college had to be done with a lot of enthusiasm, but also making sure that I wasn't the focal point of any type of broadcast. You have to let it breathe, particularly in those really important moments, especially those where there's celebration going on and the spectacular takes place. You doing what you do, you certainly understand that if you talk over that moment, you can ruin it. And it's not about coming up with the best catchphrase ahead of time so that when it happens, I've said something. It's also about just letting that moment breathe. And I think that that would have continued to have been my focus. I just coming out of college in trying to find those, jobs, they were few and far between. And at some point, I needed to get a job, which is why I moved to London to start in production for two programs. Actually, at the time, it was for one program called Trans World Sport. And that was a global syndicated program by TWI. And for me, having never been abroad during college, the opportunity to live overseas was tremendous. And it's certainly not something that I regret whatsoever. I loved the time. I have such an affinity for the British as a result. And it really was just an amazing experience. And anytime I go back, I feel like I'm going home. It's really, for me, as much as I would have liked to have been able to do what I went to school to do, to have had that experience only a few months after leaving Northwestern was still an incredible opportunity to say the least. Now I have a face for radio, so I
That's
don't
not
look as
true.
good as you do. But yeah, it is, but that's okay. So I think that, like I said, the opportunity that presented itself at that particular time, as others were not from a broadcast perspective, it just was one that I had to take.
When do you know, Tag, like if you look over the span, the spectrum of your career so far, when it was in your best interest to chase and to pursue and to go after it? And when might it have been, like you had said, the best to let it breathe and let it come to you, and knowing when the right thing is for both of those entities, and how to explore that?
I think that I've probably succeeded at times while at the same time not. I don't think that I would look back on all the different times that I've had all what I was just talking about throughout the past several years. I think that it's had some success as well as some failures. And there are times where, yes, I've chased and it hasn't worked out. And there are other times where I haven't and probably regret that I didn't, because I always tell young people, go after your dreams. And even in that particular case about being on air, while I needed to have a job and it was a great first job to have, there is certainly still some regret that I didn't continue to try to pursue and do everything and anything that I could have. But again, the timing of that was such that I needed to do something different. So there was a situation where I wish I had chased a little bit more and I didn't. But there are other times where I have, to your point, and as a result, been a part of some really wonderful discussions, negotiations, and met some terrific people along the way. So I think it's a little bit like a push and a pull. And like I said, I also believe that some of it has led to success and some of it's also not been what I should have done or hoped to have done. And in a couple of cases, it might have been some youthful enthusiasm where I thought that my opinion might have mattered more. And I spoke up in cases where maybe I should have remained silent. And in other cases where I know by speaking up, we ended up getting the result that we wanted.
To find your voice in this industry, like you were just saying, when you might not want to use it, maybe it's best to listen, maybe it's best to speak up. The thing about it is, I'm so fascinated to hear, Tag, is that with you, and you do a lot of interviews with different syndications, sports media, they look ahead to what's going on, and you're one of the go-to gurus. And there has to be, even if you regret the play by play, you still are front facing, you are still in these publications, they are interviewing you. So how much of you do you have to think about from how you portray yourself forward facing outwardly to others? How much time goes into that with you and where you are and what you're doing in this industry, thinking about how you look to others and the portrayal you give off?
I think that I haven't probably thought too much about that as much as I have, because going to Northwestern, having a journalism degree, I believe it's really important to help journalists. They today, and you know this better than I do, have such a difficult job. And there is so much blame going around for whatever might be in the media, and it often gets directed back to the journalists. And my belief is I should be helping. And part of that is because of what I just said. Part of it's also because I think it's important to get the story right. And there are times where there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. I think that there are times where people are trying to take credit when they really have nothing to be taken credit for. So for me, it's more about getting the story as accurate as possible and less to do about me, because it really shouldn't be about me.
When,
It should be about the topic.
to your point, when do you know that it's best for you to take credit and when not to take credit?
I'm not sure I've ever done a really good job of that, quite frankly, because that's just not how I've ever rolled. To me, it's more about sharing the credit and giving people the opportunity to take ownership. It's an interesting time right now in this business to see some of the giants of the industry moving on. And we've just finished a remarkable run in this particular era of CBS and CBS Sports, where Sean McManus is moving on to whatever his next chapter is going to be. And I'm sure if he stays in this business, it's going to be another great thing that he does. And if he decides he's not going to stay in it and enjoy time away, he deserves it more than anybody. And I had the privilege of working for him before he ended up at CBS. And I think that, he did what another one of my great bosses did in Lauren Matthews, who was an incredible programmer. And while he's known for programming sports, he could have programmed anything. But both of them wanted to hear an opinion. They were willing to listen. And that's an invaluable lesson that I've taken everywhere I've gone. So to me, it's not about them taking the credit. It's about allowing people to share their voice, because I want to be surrounded by smarter people. I want to come up with the best solutions to issues and problems that might arise. So it was never and has never been about me taking credit. It is much more about the people involved being able to share it. And if you're working on behalf of somebody else, it should be deflected to them, because ultimately they are the final decider in that situation. So for me, when I've worked with clients, the ability to push them forward and help them to be the ones to be out there, that's what it's about. It's not supposed to be about me. So I believe it's important to stay behind the scenes, but to make sure that what is being put out there is accurate and is putting the spotlight where it should be and not necessarily on me.
Well, that is the case. There are parts of you that are, and you said it, being around like-minded, bright people, that is your MO. But there's something that you have, and again, you're a humble guy, but there's something that you have that others don't. And when you talk about, okay, there are other people that might be smarter than you in certain areas, where do you feel like your strongest asset comes from and what that is?
Brian, I think I lost the
Oh
connection for.
shoot, my bad. Did you? Yeah, let me do this. You can hear me now? Okay. I'll yeah, because I could hear myself talking. I will re-ask that question. That's Huh. Okay. But you can hear me now.
I can.
Okay. So you like to associate yourself, Tag, with a lot of bright people. But there's something about you that's pretty bright and that can outshine others. And again, you're a humble guy, but when you think about where you are brightest, what is that?
I think that I'm not sure that I would ever say I'm the brightest, but I do think that there is an expression that my best friend in college once said about me, which is really true, which is you have the perfect combination of the northern arrogance and the southern hospitality. And I think that what that allows for is trying to do what's right while at the same time trying to be a decent human being about it. And I'm not always perfect, far from it. But I do believe that what I've tried to do is be more personable about it than trying to make everything about a transaction. So I do believe that when you have a contract signed, that it should go into the drawer and should really never be pulled out because it then should be about the relationship. So that to me, I think is a differentiator where I believe that there is a certain way just to conduct oneself. And it doesn't make me right, but I just believe that we can try to be successful being a decent person and not necessarily have to be successful by not being a good person. And there are some who are very successful and they can be ruthless. And maybe that works. And maybe that works in a certain environment and at certain companies. I just have never wanted to do that. I'd rather finish second and have people say he's a really good person than finish first and say I couldn't imagine anybody being more of a jerk.
When you carry that reputation with you and you're with clients having dinner, what is it like being around you having dinner with clients and sitting next to you and having a conversation?
I think that I'm probably today a little bit of a cheaper date because I've lost some weight, so I'm not eating as much as maybe I used to. But I think that what it is I'm not going to have the conversation that is going to be specific to just what we're talking about. If I'm in a meeting and then there's a dinner after, yes, the meeting can bleed over. But I also believe that that's a time to speak about other subjects, understand the person better. What is it that makes them tick? Who are they? So that to me is what I try to do when I'm in more of a social setting, because I generally don't like talking about myself anyway. And like you, coming from the background that I have, again, which is a journalist, I like asking questions. But to me, it's probing to understand the other person and who they are, where they came from. That to me is important. The world is too small today. Our lives are too short. And I think knowing who people are and what makes them tick is really special. And that's what I try to do in those type of social settings. I don't always want it to be about business. I think that can end up candidly being boring. And I want to learn. I never want to stop learning. So if there's an opportunity to be engaged in a conversation that takes me in different directions and opens my eyes or opens my mind to something else, I will walk away from that dinner conversation more enriched than if all we did was just talk about the business at hand.
When you're in those dinner conversations and you're committing yourself, as you said, to really getting to know the person beyond the superficial, what is their family like? You talk about asking the right questions, being personable. How much of that, there's this level of introspection that you're doing to others. But if there was a ratio for how much you do that for others and how much you do it for yourself or on yourself, what is that ratio?
I think I'm introspective every day, Brian. I know what my faults are and I try to work on them. And I know where I can improve. And some days are going to have more of that introspection than others. But you can have an experience in your life every day that makes you look at yourself and say, did I handle that properly? Did I do the best that I could? And it could be in a dialogue with a spouse, it could be with a friend, it could be with a child, it could be with anyone externally. So I don't know anybody who lives a perfect day, and I know I don't. And I do, I think, have some sort of introspective moment every day where I am questioning myself and what I might have been able to do differently. It doesn't have to be better, but maybe it's just different. So I think that's really an everyday occurrence. And maybe that makes me different in that respect. But again, I don't know anybody who has a perfect day. So hopefully everyone is having just one moment where they say, I maybe could have said this, or maybe I could have handled it that way, because that's how we all try to become better people. And like I said, I'm constantly trying to learn. And I know that I make mistakes and I make mistakes every day. So, how is it that I can take that day and maybe make the next experience that might be similar a better experience? So, for me, it is a constant evolution of who I am and who hopefully I will continue to be. It's funny, when everyone has this when they have kids, oh, you're the best dad, oh, you're the best mom. And mine will tell you when they say that to me, oh, you're the best dad. I said, no, I'm not sure that that's true. I'm just trying my best because that is what I'm trying to do. And we're all fallible. So I literally think that there is some sort of introspection that I'm doing every day to some degree. I don't want to overstate it that I'm locking myself in a room and having this deep conversation with myself. No, I'm not. But I can recognize through reaction where maybe I could have handled something a little bit differently, or maybe it was such a good reaction that I should duplicate it again. So I think that there's a lot of that goes on, for me, at least on a day-to-day basis.
With that said, when or where would you draw the line towards looking at your day or looking at your past and holding on to something in your past that you could use to better yourself, to when maybe there's a time where it's best to let go, when thinking about something is overkill? And yes, you can look back and say, this could have been this way or this could have been that way. But then there's the side of you that says, okay, that's in the past. Now it's time to let go. When do you find yourself most enthralled, most involved in investing yourself in the art of letting go?
I think for me, it's not necessarily about letting go as much as it is that expression, forgive and forget. So I think for me, it's okay, I can forgive myself for that experience and what I did and what I would have liked to have done probably much different. So I won't forget it though. So you could say, are you letting it go? To some degree, yes. But I don't believe it. And maybe it's because I'm not very good at it. And my wife likes to say sometimes you ruminate on things. And she's right. But part of it is for myself is saying, okay, that did happen. And maybe it didn't go the way you'd really like. So I remember it. I may not be beating myself up as much as I was whenever it might have happened, but I'm still remembering it so that I don't duplicate it. So I'm not sure that I ever let it go. What I do try to let go is experiences with other people that may not have been positive for a certain situation or at a particular point in time. Because, and I've said this to others, you don't know what's going on in that person's life that day. Maybe they just had a bad reaction because they also just got off the phone with their spouse or heard that their child had a bad grade in a certain class, whatever it might be. I try to give the benefit of the doubt, but then if it continues and that behavior continues, well, then there isn't a reason to let go. It is fundamental to who that person is. So there is the benefit of the doubt externally, but at some point, true colors do shine through. And what bothers me, quite frankly, having been through 32 plus years in this business, is again, we all make mistakes, but you can still be judged by that one particular episode, one particular incident, whatever it might have been. And unless it's so egregious, people change, people learn, people grow. And there has to be a little bit of giving somebody the benefit of the doubt and not having that particular time, that moment in time, define who that person is. And I think we do that too much, not just even in this business, but also in general. So there is that where externally I have more of the ability to let go than I do with my own self.
To your point, why is it that it seems, and you mentioned it in your 30 plus years in this industry, that having empathy more often than not is like an endangered species in this industry?
I think that there is so much competition, and I think that people want to be involved, be looked at. Again, I think it's also a product of society where we are at a look at me period of time, and social media has absolutely been a huge driver of that. But I think it has to do with people wanting to get the result that they want. You know, I had a really great boss in Barry Frank, and Barry had an expression at the end of a negotiation because it may have gotten a little rough. And maybe you got a lot more than the other party. And again, this was at a time when Canadian rights, when you were negotiating rights, may not have been as valuable as they are today. And he'd like to say, give them the Canadian rights. There was a little bit of humility in that. Whereas today, I think everybody wants every ounce of flesh possible. And there isn't a looking at the other side. It's more about my side. And I know paychecks are coming from your own organization. So you have to defend that. And God knows I've done that on multiple occasions. But there also has to be some understanding of the other side and why they are feeling the way that they do. And that's when you can get to the best compromise. So I believe that you're right, that the amount of empathy in this business is not maybe as it used to be at one time. But I also think that the same desires to have the optimal result for your side still exist. That hasn't changed. I think it's how people go about it. And that's where I try to differentiate myself, where I'm trying to do what is in the best interest of whatever I'm representing or trying to do. But I don't want to do it to a point that I have poisoned the relationship that will be left behind. And it may not even be me who's in that relationship, because when you're an agent, you're turning that relationship back over to whoever you were representing. But even that relationship can be frayed by the third party. So I try not to do that. But is that empathetic? I'm not sure that's what it is as much as it is trying to be reasonable and understanding.
Could it be something to do with how we view winning in the industry? And there is this, you said it, there's this competition that encompasses people. They are looking out for themselves, and you have to be in that sense. For your company, why are you employed? It's in the interest of making money. But is there, and I know we talked about the empathy thing, but are there ways to win and fulfill your obligations while at the same time keeping some of these relationships? Because sometimes that's in negotiating, that is not, it doesn't matter who you are. That is a very challenging thing to do.
Well, again, I think that there has to be the fundamental understanding from the get-go that you're just on different sides. And then it's how do you conduct yourself during that process? And I think that, I have at least tried to do that where I'm getting the result that I need. And when I say I mean whoever I'm working with, while at the same time not doing it in a way where the other party walks away and says, he's awful to deal with. How does that help anybody? It doesn't. Does that mean that I never get angry or I never get upset during a conversation? No, of course I do. Absolutely. And what will really, certainly infuriate me is if something is said that is completely inaccurate and untrue or is derogatory. That's when I will be very, very defensive of the party that I'm working with and against what was said. That I will never apologize for. And I've had situations where colleagues have been berated on phone calls, on Zooms, whatever it might be in meetings, and I absolutely have stood up. I've had situations where the opposite has been true, where I've been on the receiving end and others did not stand up. And I didn't understand that. And I still don't, because I think that there isn't a reason to be that dismissive of somebody in that type of setting. You may not agree, and they may say something that is right for them, but is absolutely wrong for you. And I've had that happen plenty of times. But when it becomes derogatory and insulting, that's when I think something needs to be said. And like I said, I've been on the receiving end where no one stood up. And that was very frustrating. And then there have been times where I've stood up for myself, and the way I went about it, back to not being perfect and making mistakes and trying to learn from it, where I was wrong. And I've subsequently apologized for it. But, again, sometimes being passionate about a subject doesn't excuse the way in which that passion is expressed or that opinion is articulated. So I've had to learn, and I continue to learn on how to make sure that trying to communicate at least in the best way possible under any set of circumstances.
So At the crux of everything you're saying, is there anything more potent in being irksome than, say, the fear of being misunderstood? And of all the things that can drag one down, that concept in itself might reign supreme above others.
For me, in terms of being misunderstood, no, I don't. I think words matter. I really do. I think that depending upon how a word is used or what specific word is used, the context can change. But I don't think that, to your question, I don't think about it to that level as I'm going through a conversation. I'm trying to be thoughtful, but I'm not trying to overthink it, because then again, the old expression of paralysis by analysis, I don't want that. I definitely don't want that. So I think it has much more to do with trying to make sure that what I'm saying is clear and concise and understandable, even if it has to be repeated in a different way, just so that the other party or even your own group can understand exactly what it is. But again, that's why I like to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am and give them the opportunity to speak if they work for me or part of a team that I might be leading, because ultimately I may not have the right answer, or I have part of the right answer and it can be augmented so that it's an even better answer. That to me is what's more important. And I really have learned that from, like I said, others that I have worked for who have provided that platform in order to be in a position where we can hopefully have the optimal result. And there are a myriad of examples over many, many years where that's been the case. And in a couple of situations, we still weren't successful. But as I say to my kids, as long as you can look in the mirror and know you tried and know you gave it your best and put your best thought into it, you let the chips fall where they may. You're not going to win 100% of the time. A baseball player, if they're hitting 300, is still only hitting 3 out of 10. So success can be defined in a lot of different ways. But even going through those experiences can lead to future successes if you learn from them, at least those that either you did end up having the optimal result or those where maybe you didn't.
Let me leave you with this. How would you rate success as a father?
For myself personally,
Yes.
so I was blessed because I had a tremendous father. I had a wonderful mother, and I had terrific grandparents. But there are certain things that will forever stay with me. And one of my grandfathers had said, as a parent, you are responsible for two things: to give your kids love and an education. If you use that as the barometer for success, then I'm very successful. But I don't use that as the measuring stick. I think there are other ways to also look at how I'm doing on a daily basis as a parent. Am I attentive enough? Am I around enough? I still today take red eyes to make sure that I can be back in time to be there for my family. And a lot of people, after a certain amount of time, are like, I'm not doing that anymore. I think it's really important to do that. And if I can get back and take my kids to school, I want to do that. If I can be back in time to pick them up from school, I want to do that. I try not to miss very many events that they have. And from that level, I think, yes, that has been successful. But I remember many, many years ago, when I was working at ESPN and my eldest was younger, my wife did say to me, and she was right, this is going to date me, but you're on that BlackBerry too much. And you're not here, you're not present. And she was right. So a little modification there was important. I think that there are certain ways where absolutely I have been a successful father. There are other ways where I think I've made mistakes, maybe gotten a little more frustrated than I needed to at a certain situation, maybe was angrier than I should have been at a certain time. But I also hope, and I've told my children this, don't ever be afraid to come to me and say, I'm mad at you. I'm upset with you. I don't like how you handled this, because that is going to only make our relationship stronger. I may not agree, but I want to hear, and I want them to be able to come and say, I wish you would have handled this a little bit differently than you did. And that doesn't always happen, but like I said, I mean, I don't know any parent that hasn't made mistakes. And even in one situation, I remember I had gone to Princeton Review when I was 16 years old, and I drove there, and I got too close to another car that was parked, and I hit their car with mine. Their car was fine. Mine ended up having a hole in it, and got home, said to my mom, I'm going to pay for the damage. It's my fault. She said, your father will deal with it when he gets home. My dad comes home, tell him the story, and he said, you know what? You got to go back to driver's education. And I said, I made a mistake. Haven't you ever made a mistake? And I think that from that perspective of understanding that clearly our kids are going to be making mistakes, and that I'm certainly not perfect, it's providing, again, that forum to have that discussion so that we can be better as a unit, as opposed to allowing it to fester and, quite frankly, maybe repeating itself. I don't think that's in anybody's best interest.
And then it comes out sideways, and that's never a good thing. But as we wrap up this conversation, Tag, one of the big takeaways that I have from this is the power for you in showing up for others and showing up for yourself, and the benefits that come with that, among the many, in this really deep conversation. That I appreciate you going to those places with me and having very much a philosophical outlook on things. And as you can probably tell, we talked about empathy. The way I like to run these interviews is full of empathy. That's sort of the way that I like to take these. Tag Garson, my goodness, president of Excelsior Sports Entertainment. He is doing great things and will continue to do so. I'm Bryan Fenley. Tag, thanks so much for doing this with me.
Bryan, listen, I appreciate the time, and anytime you want to do it again and maybe even talk about more specifics in the sports and entertainment business, happy to do it. But this was really a wonderful 30 minutes with you, and I can't thank you enough for making the time to have the discussion.